Hello, friends. Welcome to the Your Project Shepherd podcast. I'm your host, Curtis Lawson, and we are here to teach that every successful construction project has 4 components demonstrated by this simple drawing of a house. The foundation is proper planning. The left wall is your team, the right wall is communication, and the roof is proper execution. Have all 4 of these components in place, and your project will succeed. We're here to help professionals and homeowners alike make the best decisions about designing, planning, and building custom homes. If you'd like more information about how Shepherd can help you with your project or business, visit us at yourprojectshepherd.com. And now, here's today's episode. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to a new episode of the Your Project Shepherd podcast. I'm your host, Curtis Lawson, and I am joined for the second time by my friend David Cox with Design DCA.
Thank you.
Welcome, David.
Appreciate you having me back.
Yeah, good to have you back. Today, we are going to talk about strategies for designing a cost-effective home or kind of getting the most bang for your buck when you're designing a home.
Right.
And, I think that you and I both, but oftentimes you're the first person to kind of have the touch with the client.
Sure.
And we always run into this this struggle of the client's dreams, their big dreams for their dream home versus the realities of budgets, right?
Exactly. It is definitely a constant struggle.
So how do you, as a designer, balance that dream with the reality? Kind of what's your basic philosophy on dealing with that problem?
Oh, well, it's a multi-approach, multi-point thing that we have to touch on regularly throughout the process. We, of course, question the clients in the initial meeting of what their expected contract budget is, construction budget is, what their expectations are. They show them all of their beautiful inspiration photos, many of which come from California, very high-end homes, expansive walls of glass, window walls, etc. So, more often than not, one of the first conversations that comes up is reminding them that we are in Houston, Texas, not, San Diego. So at every point, we're just trying to point out the reality and the importance of certain things. Natural light, great. A 20-foot wide opening, not really necessary in Houston, to speak to that specifically. So we offer alternatives. Get the same size, get a 16-foot slider versus a sacking door, pocket door, etc. It's just little things like that kind of go on throughout the entire process. Roofing material, metal roof versus composition, etc. All of those things. So. In
regards to those doors, again, here in Houston, most people have these thoughts of having their doors wide open, having a big party, and having people flow in and out, but in reality, most of the time, or most times here, the doors never get open. So
right.
as just a cost driver, because those doors are expensive. We tell people to plan on maybe $1,000 a linear foot for those doors.
That's exactly what I say. Yes.
And you can achieve the same open look with just fixed window units, right? Still get lots of natural light.
Most definitely.
And cut that down from $1,000 a foot. Maybe a $20,000 set of sliding doors. Cut that down to maybe $2,000 or $3,000 worth of windows,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah, that's a huge item right there that we discuss on virtually every project, honestly. It's one of our most common cost discussions is trying to instill that reality of the humidity and the mosquitoes we have here, reminding them of that reality. And, we're in one of those few times of the year right now where they could actually enjoy it. But yeah. How often is that? So.
Yeah, I was at somebody's party, I think back over Christmas, and they had some very large sliding doors. And I think that they felt like they just had to use them since they paid for them. And it was, this Christmas was not cold, and it was very humid outside, and they had those doors open. It was not comfortable in the house.
Exactly, especially if it's a formal event and you're in a jacket, etc.
Yeah, and they were also running the barbecue grill outside, and guess where all the smoke from the grill was going?
Right. Yes, another reality that we don't think of.
Yeah. So yeah, there's lots of good alternatives. So during the early in the design process, it's asking the question early, right? About budget, which is something that we always talk about here. Is just establish that baseline
exactly
very early and check it against reality too. So if they come to you and everyone does this, they've got like a list of I want 5 bedrooms and a game room and a study and a wine room and a blah, blah, blah room. But I want a 3,500 square foot house.
3,500 square feet, yes.
Right.
That is also extremely common. Yes, I mean, I wouldn't say every project, but, and it's common. I mean, it's understandable because people don't know what 3,500 square feet looks like in general, unless you do this day in and day out like we do.
Right.
But yeah, it's a regular occurrence to get a wish list that is a 5,000 square foot house and a request for a 4,000 square foot house, et cetera. And that's one of the key things that we stress is assembling the team early on so that they're not just hearing this from me, they're hearing it from the builder as well, who knows the pricing day in and day out and can reinforce, what I'm saying and tie that together with their expected desired construction budget and just, try to figure out where we can either rein them in or if they're willing and able to increase their budget, which, can be a bit of a frustration at times because a lot of people don't like talking about money, so they'll tell us one thing, but then as you keep saying, you're going over, you're adding cost, et cetera, it's just kind of a nod and go on. So it's that anxiety of, can they really afford this and they're just kind of hedging their bets, or when the bids come in, are they going to be frustrated and disappointed and angry at everybody, even though we tried to tell them all along, it seems to be 50-50. It seems like a lot of people kind of are hedging that number a little bit when they tell us what their desired construction cost is. And then when it comes in 20-25% more, ultimately they want what they want and, can oftentimes actually afford it. It's just not what they had hoped for initially. So
yeah, I was meeting with some people this week actually who, and this was about a renovation, but they, so we walked through the project. In my head, I'm kind of adding up $800,000, and at the end, I said, "Well, have you guys set a budget for this project?" Which is something I always try to ask at the very first meeting.
Sure.
Have you already set a budget for the project? Because they said they talked to other contractors, and she said, yeah, I was trying to keep it around 350 when we first started, and the architect, who's a friend of mine, was also there,
right.
and she said, yeah, but I was telling him that I know we're adding some costs. I'm thinking maybe it's going to be like 450 or 5 now.
Right. Yeah.
And I said, well, I think that's really light.
Exactly.
I said, I think you're going to be a good bit more than that. And so we talked a while, and we built some more rapport. And she said, okay. She said, I know it's going to be more than that. I didn't want to tell you a number earlier, but I'm more comfortable with you now, so I can afford maybe up to 650.
Okay.
And I was like,
So
okay, well, that's
more reasonable.
That's a delta that we can through design we can work with that.
Exactly.
But my point is that people oftentimes are very guarded with their financial situation, and the first number they tell you is oftentimes not the real number.
Exactly.
Which is frustrating, right? Because we're trying to help them plan for success, and if they're not open with what their realistic budget is, if they're always telling us a low number, they're just fighting themselves.
Exactly. It's a common occurrence, and it is, as you say, quite frustrating at times. And we've had them go both ways. I mean, I had one last year where, every step of the way things kept getting larger, higher ceiling heights, more square footage, more glass, and we remind the client, we're diligent about reminding the client, this is a cost item, this is going to be an overage, et cetera, et cetera. We're not looking at the original cost per square foot that you told me you wanted. And at the end of the day, they ended up selling the lot and buying a pre-existing home once they got the bid back from the builder, even though, we'd done our best to educate them all along the way. But on the flip side, we often get ones who are definitely kind of hedging their bets a little bit and ultimately move forward happily, with the design.
Honestly, I would rather see them get to that point and sell the lot and walk away from it than try to find somebody that tells them what they want to hear.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, that's the worst. That's the worst scenario right there. They're just setting themselves up for trouble at that point. Yeah,
we, as a consultant, those are the types of jobs that I get hired on the most to go in and bat cleanup or to help sort things out, is when they, they've got 3 builders that tell them, hey, this house is, $1.5 million. Oh, that's way out of budget. I found a guy that said he can do it for $900.
Right.
Okay.
That's always a bad sign.
Yeah, and then they get halfway through it and realize that's not a real number.
Exactly. Yeah, we see that as well. We had a client a couple of years ago that we ultimately ended up not doing the work for them. We decided it just wasn't a good fit because of some red flags we were seeing early on, and the home actually was under construction close to where I live, so I witnessed it setting at a midpoint stage for probably about 18 months before it finally kind of kicked off again and slowly, gradually got finished up. But it's just going with the lowest. The person who tells you what you want to hear is just not typically the way to go, obviously.
Yeah. There's a couple of Facebook groups that I kind of keep an eye on just partially for entertainment value and partially every once in a while I'll jump in there and kind of make a comment and try to get some good advice. But there's a lot of Facebook groups out there dedicated to people discussing building their houses and designing their houses. And what I see quite often is they'll say, "Hey, I'm in Houston, Texas. My designer and my builder are telling me this house is going to be $400 a square foot. Right. I know that I can build it cheaper." And you'll see all these people from around the country chime in and say, "Oh no, that's way too expensive. You can build that for $200 a square foot." And people will get it in their head
yes.
that they can build a house in Houston for middle of Kansas prices, maybe, exactly. Right?
Yeah.
And instead of listening to the people who they hired, right, they'll start listening to 20 people on the internet instead.
The internet. That's telling them what they want to hear. That's the answer they're looking for. It's just not the right answer. So obviously costs vary wildly regionally, even from here to Austin. We occasionally do projects over in Austin, and I've learned not to quote the same expectations here. If it's an Austin-based project, it's significantly more with topography, site work, just labor rates,
even just the subcontractor base and everything.
Exactly.
Yeah, a house that costs whatever $300 a foot here might be $500 a foot in Austin.
You just nailed it on the numbers that we dealt with. Yes, we had a client that was wanting to stay in that $300 a foot range, and we designed what we were comfortable with, and it actually did end up coming back pushing $500 a square foot. So now we're reevaluating and trying to figure out how to help them out. So
yeah, it's wild. I know some people who are builders in Houston who are moving into the Hill Country to open an office, or maybe just to move their operation to the Hill Country.
Right.
And they're telling me that like electricians, plumbers, a lot of the tradespeople are double out there what they are here.
Exactly.
And it's not because the materials are more expensive out there. It's just the labor is more scarce and the guys are crazy busy. So they're going to charge more.
Definitely. I've heard the same thing on the foundation end, stucco, et cetera, all across the board. We've got a remodel project on Lake Travis over there right now. That's one of our longtime Houston builder friends and associates, and it's his personal house, and he's finding out the hard way. It's a completely different scale over there with the rates. So.
Yeah. We did a job in Fredericksburg last year, and it was a Houston client who was doing some work there, and we ended up driving subcontractors from Houston, paying for hotels.
Wow.
And it was still cheaper than hiring the local guy.
That's funny. That is a big difference, substantial.
So I know that, obviously you have the ability to design a lot of different styles of homes, but, looking at your website, you seem to focus more on modern transitional design. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, most definitely. My personal favorite is kind of all out Dwell magazine modern, cubist forms, flat roofs, etc. But we've kind of found a niche for ourselves somewhat unintentionally, but I'm happy with it, and in kind of the transitional modern category where we kind of take more classical architecture forms and modernize, put a little unique twist on them.
As a builder, I know that modern stuff, although it looks simpler, can be more expensive to build, right?
Most definitely.
The big spans, the clean lines that are required, it just requires a higher level of subcontractor detail, all that, right?
It does, and that is a common misconception. A perfect example that a client and I were just having a discussion about last week is the no baseboard look, where you have the sheetrock going down to the wood floor with a little sheetrock J mold or something at the bottom, super clean, very sophisticated kind of museum quality look. But to do that properly is very costly, very labor intensive. And this happened to be a remodel, so that kind of made it even worse. He was dealing with walls that weren't necessarily all plumb and square from the original build.
Foundation that's out of whack.
Right, exactly. So little things like that just, there's no baseboard, that must save me money. That's definitely not the case. So,
well, it's hard to find a drywall guy that's capable of executing that well.
It is. It really is. Yeah, it's an art. And, the level 5 finish on the walls, the smooth finish on the walls, versus being able to kind of hide some little flaws here and there with some texture, et cetera. All of those things definitely add cost, and we try to advise clients on that come to us and want modern, and try to find that happy medium where they're still getting that modern look. You mentioned the open concept and the large spans. I think there's such a thing as too open of a concept. I like room definition, so even when we have large expansive areas, we're typically still specking out some drop beams and some areas to kind of define spaces, an occasional column here and there, wing wall, et cetera, that can kind of help not only define the space, but at the same time reduce those spans. So we, can try to avoid steel beams, et cetera, when we need to, when it becomes a budget item. So
that was kind of where I was going with that, was when we're doing more modern design, transitional design that tends to be more expensive. What are some other strategies that we can employ to control those costs?
A lot of it, we kind of already touched on a big item with the windows earlier. A 6 foot by 6 foot fixed glass window is a pretty impressive piece of glass, but yet it's also a somewhat, in the whole scheme of things, affordable window, compared to other things.
Yeah.
You put a series of 3 of those across the back of a living room looking out to the landscape and the pool, and that's, 18 feet of glass in a fairly economical fashion versus other alternatives. Roofing is always a big thing. With transitional modern, we often tend to have traditional pitched roofs, which allows for, more standard composition shingles versus having to go with, in a flat or a very low pitched roof, a TPO or a standing seam metal, which obviously adds a significant amount of cost. So we always advise on that, and that tends to work well with the transitional style versus all out modern.
So on the interior details, you were talking about the no baseboard look, right, or the oftentimes we've done the flush baseboards where there's a reveal between the baseboards and the drywall.
Right.
But some alternatives that we've come up with for that I think still achieve the modern look are on the interior doors using a kerf jamb.
Yes. To
where you've got an L molding basically that's going to get slip into a slot cut into the door jamb,
right,
and then just do an applied baseboard on top of the on top of the drywall, and you could use instead of a 1x4 that's big, real thick and chunky, you can use a 1/2 inch or a kind of a standard baseboard that's a little less obtrusive. And you can achieve a real clean look that way without
100%
going to that expense.
That full cost, yeah, definitely. I'm a big fan of kerf jambs in a variety of styles. We've done a lot of old world designs as well where we've done curved, because that's kind of replicates your old school plaster walls and those types of assemblies where there wasn't as much trim work in certain styles. So big fan of that. Simple baseboards. We have a lot of our builders that will go, even though it's clean and simple, still a larger baseboard, like 6 or 8 inches, so they can turn the outlets sideways and put them in the baseboard. Just kind of cleans everything up and gives that kind of slick, modern, sophisticated look without, all the overly costly details at times. And the kerf jambs obviously are a little more, but still in the whole scheme of things, that's not as expensive as other things that can take place. So.
Yeah, I think cabinets in modern design actually can be a decent savings as long as you're not going with like a high-end stain grade cabinet. Like if you did a painted or a melamine cabinet, those can actually be pretty affordable.
Exactly. Yeah, there's some great looking choices in modern style cabinetry that don't have to break the bank.
Yeah.
You get into the German and the Italian stuff. Obviously, it's a little different, but looks great, but super expensive. But there's much more affordable alternatives for that. And in modern, a melamine finish, a paint grade finish tends to be a lot more acceptable, a lot more common than a stain grade finish, which obviously can cost more. So that's an area where we can help a little bit with savings.
And those cabinets can actually be less expensive than a real heavy traditional house on the cabinets, because they have less of the moldings and less of the kind of the multi-piece doors and
exactly
and all that kind of stuff.
Just
so
nice flush panel doors and no crown, etc. So
yeah, you could even go no hardware on modern and do like a finger rail or a touch latch or something like that, and even save some money on hardware that way too.
Because that can add up as well. As if you go with a high-end brand, that gets costly very, very quickly.
Let's talk about kind of big picture stuff as far as how it drives cost. I think some people get hung up on saying, oh, well, I'll just cut back on my countertops and my tile and I'll save money that way. But I usually tell people you're not going to save that much money by cutting back on your finishes. Going from, $3,000 a slab to $2,500 a slab, or $1,000 to $800 a slab, you're not going to save that much money on your countertops.
Agreed.
Right. So you've got to approach it more from the kind of the big picture items.
Right.
And so let's talk about some things that kind of drive the big cost. And to me, it starts with foundation. Right. And so if you've got a big spread out house, you're pouring a lot more concrete. Right. And the more complicated your shape is, the more expensive it's going to be. So keep the slab compact.
Right.
Don't start putting a lot of angles and extensions on it. A simple foundation is going to be cheaper to pour, right?
Always, yeah. And, more reliable typically too, especially if you're going the post-tension route versus a structural slab with void boxes and piers. Simpler is in the form is definitely better. And, that kind of leads into the 1-story versus 2-story, the size of the foundation. Anytime you can double your square footage off of the same size of foundation and same area of roof, that's, a win-win for the budget, definitely.
In regard to foundation types, I think maybe 20, 30 years ago, post-tension got kind of a real bad rap, which is kind of, I guess when it first came out, maybe maybe the 90s. It got, I'm not sure if it came out then, but it was pretty popular when it first, back in those years, 90s, early 2000s, right? And I think there were a lot of them being done badly. In fact, here in the city of Bel Air, where we are, they outlawed post-tension foundations back then because there's so many problems. But I spoke to a couple of engineers that we work with all the time, and they'll tell you that a properly built post-tension foundation is going to perform very well.
That's what I've always heard from our engineers that we work with as well. It's not something we really shy away from. Yep. If it's a big sprawling slab with all kinds of wings projecting out here and there and everywhere, and wing walls for courtyard walls, etc., then, maybe it's not the right way to go. Right. But if you're talking a more typical, even if it does have some expanse to it or some projections to it within reason, I've never been afraid to go that route to save the client some money.
Yeah, same here. So a post-tension foundation, of course, I haven't priced one out in a few months, but they were running maybe like $9 a square foot for a post-tension slab, whereas the more, I'll call them the kind of the Cadillac slab on void boxes with a lot of steel, a lot of grade beams, those are maybe $18 to $20 a square foot, right? And so that's a pretty big savings just right off the bat.
Most definitely. And it's interesting to hear you say those numbers because, we don't deal with the numbers day in and day out like you do. I quiz my builders every once in a while on certain things, not only just cost per foot, but kind of dialing down to foundation cost, et cetera. But I hadn't asked that question recently. So that's interesting to hear that it's still about double.
It's essentially double. Yeah. Right off the bat, if you can save 50% on your foundation. Now, again, it's got to be installed properly, so that kind of goes back to making sure that you have your engineer come out,
do the pre-pour inspection,
do the inspections, double check these guys. Don't trust them, but if it's done properly, it's a good foundation.
Agreed.
Another cost saving strategy that we've done several times in the last few years has been doing a chemical soil injection.
Okay.
And it's kind of newer. Some of the engineers are like, I don't know. Some of them are very, very okay with it. Right. But again, we've gone from, when you have soil that has a high plasticity, a high PVR, and they're speccing out 15-foot piers all over the, 70 to 100 piers, 15 feet deep at $350, $400 a pop. and you can take those away by just treating the soil.
Okay.
That's a big savings
It
too.
is. I honestly am not familiar with that. That's interesting.
Okay.
I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, check it out.
Learn something new every day.
Yeah, there's a couple of companies that we've used that do that, and essentially they come around with a big rig, a Bobcat with a big injection rig on the front of it that has a chemical solution, and they walk around and stick these big needles in the soil and inject this chemical.
Very interesting.
And it removes the plasticity. And I think the last house we did it on, the treatment cost $20,000 or $30,000 to do, but it saved, I think, $70,000 or $80,000.
I mean, that's huge. That's
So-
a no-brainer at that point.
So they shaved $50,000 off the cost of their foundation by going that route.
Okay, that's awesome. I will have to look into that, definitely.
Yeah.
So how deep does the injection go, roughly?
I want to say it goes 20 feet, but don't quote me on that.
Yeah, no, that's interesting.
It's a really interesting process. They actually hook up the machine to the fire hydrant on the lot.
All right.
And so they're getting high pressure water. They have to rent a special meter from the city to hook onto their machine to meter the water as they go. But it's
Interesting.
and you can use it on foundation repairs too.
Can you? Okay.
Yeah, so I've got an old 1950s ranch here in the Meyerland area,
Right.
and our foundation's terrible.
Okay.
I was fixing it multiple times, and so I had them come out and treat the perimeter of my house, and it still moves a little bit, but way less than it did before. So
Okay.
it's a good foundation repair alternative too.
That's good. That's very interesting. I'm happy to hear about that. So
Anyway, starting with the foundation, there's a great way to consider saving some money on your build. Structurally, I don't think there's that big of a difference to go between a 2x4 and a 2x6 wall. It's a very nominal difference.
Right, exactly. And I've had this conversation with multiple builders lately as well. I may have asked you at one point. With the prevalence of spray foam insulation and just being so much more efficient, I kind of started to question. My go-to has always been 2x6 exterior walls, unless it's a real budget-minded project and the client tells me, stick with 2x4. That's just kind of our default is 2x6. And I started wondering how necessary or important that really was with high performance insulations, et cetera. But everyone I've asked has said it's still worthwhile since it is such a minimal cost just for the extra wiring space, keeping wires out of the insulation, the plumbing, et cetera.
Yep.
All of those things. And plus a lot of the homes we deal with have ceiling heights greater than 10 feet. So then, from a structural engineering point of view, we either have to double the 2x4 studs or go with the 2x6. So at that point, it just makes sense anyway. So
yeah, I think that trying to stick with standard dimensions as far as as it applies to dimensional lumber can make a difference. We talked about open spans. Once you get over a certain span, you've got to switch to engineered lumber versus standard framing lumber.
Right.
I love what you said about giving the spaces some definition and mixing in some drop beams and some cased openings, things like that, a way to define the spaces. But that also can save you steel framing. It can save you big engineered beams. It can save some good framing cost.
Exactly. Something we often have to discuss and educate our clients on is the battle of square footage as related to cost. And I come from a builder background. That's the core of my training is working for builders early on. And anytime you can stack things, it's more efficient. So that's the mentality I use in design. You can't always pull it off. We have to offset walls on the second floor regularly, obviously, but whenever we can stack them with the first floor wall, interior or exterior, that's always our first attempt. And we'll have a client that is trying to shave, 300 square feet. And they're like, well, I can, move that second floor wall in 18 inches. I don't need that. But then you have to explain that, well, okay, you saved 10 square feet, but you might have just cost yourself $1,000 beam underneath that wall that was stacked on an exterior wall and no longer is. People get so hung up on the cost per square foot number that they don't understand that all of that actually does eventually get bid out, per the frame package, per the engineering, et cetera.
Yeah.
And if we can save on that frame package and beams and all of those things, that helps them in the long run.
Yeah. I think that again comes from the mentality of, so-and-so said it costs $300 a square foot to build a house. I use the price per square foot. I've said this many times on here. I use the price per square foot as a very loose frame of reference.
Right.
It is in no way to be taken as gospel numbers, right?
Right. And that's all it should be is a loose frame of reference. I mean, it's a good process starter, topic of conversation, but there's just way too many variables in the design and the selection, the site conditions. Do you have a 30-foot long driveway or a 20,000 square feet of flat work with a circle drive and pool decking, et cetera? It's just that there's so many variables that go into play.
But back to the framing, also by not stacking walls or having things that are offset like that, you could also be shooting yourself in the foot with running mechanicals and things like that. That can drive up costs too.
Yes, definitely. The simpler the form, the more things stack, the more you're going to save. It doesn't always lead to the most beautiful dream home if it's a 2-story box, but if you're out for budget, that's the cheapest way to go.
Yeah. One thing that I don't think is a good place to try to save money is going to using like 2x12 ceiling joists and things like that. I'm a huge fan. In fact, like all I will do is open web trusses.
Okay.
I'm a big fan of that for running mechanicals because it saves so much time. You're not having to maybe create chases that in places where you don't want them.
Yes, and we're the same with a few rare exceptions. Everything we do is floor trusses, not floor joists. We spec typically a 20-inch deep one, so there's plenty of room for HVAC runs, et cetera, and they can handle long spans. That's definitely a good way to spend your money versus 2x12s. And again, you get into additional beams, you get into fur downs, everything else,
or TJIs or something like that, where you're having to cut big holes, big holes in them, which is not ideal.
Exactly.
From an energy efficiency perspective, too, there's certain things that we need to. Yes, you could save money by doing it, but are you shooting yourself in the foot when it comes to efficiency or building performance too? Right.
Exactly. We always kind of stress, as the first line of defense: good windows, good insulation, high SEER rating on the HVAC, and then if you want to take it above and beyond that with heat pumps, et cetera, that's, if the budget allows, that's great, that's awesome. But start with kind of those 3 core basics of good insulation, high SEER, and good windows.
So they also have to think about factoring operating cost or cost of ownership versus upfront costs too, because many people are coming from owning an older home that might have a higher cost of ownership. And so they're factoring a lot of utility costs and maintenance costs that they won't necessarily have on a newer, high-performance, well-built home, too,
there's definitely cost savings to be had there, and sometimes very substantial. You can go from $600 a month electric bill to, $75. I mean, it's really radical how different a high-performance home can be on your utility cost.
I know that you work with Toner as well on building performance stuff. Is that a conversation that you have, or do you kind of pass it to Toner and let him have the conversation, or what?
It's a little bit of both. I let Toner handle the high end level of it. Definitely, he is far more educated on it all than I. But we kind of try to give that basic information and explain what services he can provide to take it to the next level and truly above and beyond in performance. And let him handle that.
You know what? One thing that I should have started with this because it kind of goes back to even before foundation. As I'm scrolling through my notes here, I'm realizing that I missed something. So one of the kind of the foundations, if you will, of having a cost-effective project starts even before the foundation. It's and even before design. It's just going back all the way back to site selection.
Yes.
Right. Certain building sites are just going to create challenges.
Exactly.
Period. And so, again, most people, I think it's safe to say, are going to come to you and to me after they've already bought a lot. Most of the time, yes. Unfortunately.
Right.
But, in a perfect world for me and for you, I think that they would involve you before they even purchase the property. That way you can advise them as to, hey, especially if you're on a budget,
yes,
this may not be the best property for you.
Exactly. I agree completely, but as you say, unfortunately, that's rarely the case. It does happen occasionally, which is nice to be able to kind of do some site analysis and some education up front before they make their decision, and it's potentially too late. We don't have topography to deal with typically in Houston, which can be a big cost factor in other places, but we have other issues such as floodplain and oversized lots that require detention, although that's kind of been backed off of a little bit and helped with a few projects here lately. But
it's on again, off again.
Yeah, exactly. We have, I think, 2 under construction right now where, if we can get it re-permitted, if the builder can get it re-permitted by the new standards, it's literally like a $60,000 differential of what would have to go in versus what can go in now.
I'm about to strangle the city when it comes to that right now. We had a client where it was originally permitted under the old rules. We had to do detention. Then they said, hey, the new rules are out.
Right.
You don't have to do it. So we resubmitted it, and they said, oh, we changed our minds. We're not going to do it. You're back to it. Okay. And then it was on again. And so we resubmitted, and they said, well, you could only resubmit it. You can't resubmit it unless you resubmit the entire project. Okay. You can't just do the drainage. So we tabled it. We moved on. We put the detention in.
Okay.
And then I get an email from the city saying, oh, by the way, we changed the rules again, and now you can re-permit just the detention. So in like a 3-month span, we went from yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, and finally it was too late, and the client had spent $30,000 on detention.
To get it done and be able to move in. Yeah, that's frustrating for everyone.
They're not on my good list right now.
Understandable.
So other than that, what are some other kind of site considerations that can cause big price increases?
Well, this isn't so much a site consideration, but just the municipality. West U has certain requirements the city of Houston doesn't, and some of those do add extra cost. 5/8 sheetrock everywhere. I think they still require copper piping, I believe.
I think so.
Bel Air has certain exceptions, but often homes in Bel Air require a fire sprinkler system these days. So there's things like that can vary, from street to street, literally sometimes, depending on where you are and what municipality you
Memorial villages require fire sprinklers.
Yes, they do, right.
Yeah, and again, we mentioned this earlier, but like here in Bel Air, there's no post-tension slabs. You got to do the slab and the void boxes.
Exactly, yeah, and that's huge.
And then again, floodplain, so it is a big cost penalty to have to raise that house up, whether it's 3 feet or 8 feet, there may not be that big of a cost increase, but just getting it up off the ground, having elevated slab is going to add cost.
It does, and then plus the pre-construction items such as the mitigation study, a drainage plan that has to be done by a civil engineer. We do some of our drainage plans on non-floodplain projects where it's just a very rudimentary kind of slope and swale and a few catch basins here and there. But if it's floodplain, it has to be done by a civil engineer along with the mitigation study and just the cost of that raised foundation, flood vents, everything that goes along with that.
Yeah. So one kind of cost savings strategy when it comes to houses in the floodplain that we've done successfully a couple times now is, again, if you have to raise the house 5 feet, let's say, for floodplain, why not raise it 8? Stick the garage under it, exactly. And again, you're stacking, you're saving area.
Exactly.
So if you can gain some efficiencies of scale by putting like a garage, a covered outdoor living space under the house, storage rooms, all that kind of stuff, that you can save a lot of money that way.
Definitely. Anytime you can reduce the size of that footprint, whether it be living space, garage space, outdoor spaces, et cetera, if you can compress that, you're saving dollars. And post Harvey, we've done a few of those projects. Places where previously we would have had to have raised 4 feet. Now all of a sudden it's 7 feet. So as you say, why not at that point? It just makes more sense to do it kind of Galveston style, Bay House style, where you've got the garage, the storage underneath.
And it doesn't have to look like a beach house.
No, not at all.
You can do some great design and have it look really attractive with that feature.
It doesn't require the breakaway walls and stuff like we would, in the coastal areas. It can just look like a 2 or 2.5 story home, but that first floor is garage, unfinished, whatever it may be.
I think another consideration that comes into play a lot with smaller properties like infill smaller lots is going to be utility placement. So, here in Houston, we're dealing in most of the areas with the power lines that are all above ground. Right. And, there are a few things that are more frustrating than starting construction and realizing that power line is too close to the structure. Yes. So, kind of having to keep the house away from power lines can sometimes be a struggle.
It can.
There's a radius, a radius that has to be maintained.
Right, and especially if it's discovered late in the game, after the fact, etc. Several projects we have actually gotten the power line height and location data from the surveyor, as good as they can approximate it anyway. Yeah. And then we've actually modeled that line into our SketchUp 3D model of the property, and then done a 10-foot radius that we extrude along that, and kind of a red, no-go zone. So yep. A client can understand if they want an apartment over their detached garage in the back, we can do that, but it's got to step in, 8 feet, 10 feet from the back of your garage wall. And those are very important things to plan for properly, and not find out the hard way after the fact. And it's hard to convince people sometimes, because the city of Houston or Cedar Point or whoever it may have been was very lax on that for quite some time. I mean, you can go in these neighborhoods with where detached garages in the rear are very prevalent with 2-story conditions, and see homes that really aren't all that old, where you could, virtually reach out
and grab the power line,
grab it, so they see that on their neighbors and like, well, they did it, but they've really, as they should, they've really cracked down on that a lot in the last few years. So. And
some of the cities do require that you do that power line profile. I think Westview, Bel Air, they require that the surveyor show that data
exactly,
and that it's shown on the plans for submittal too.
Right. I think that's a good decision. I mean, it's wise. I mean, it's always better to find out these things sooner rather than later. They can be frustrating at any stage, and kind of dash your hopes of what you want above the garage, et cetera. But it's far better to know it sooner rather than later.
I think Houston should require it. I was consulting on a project recently where the Centerpoint guy made a site visit after the house was framed and had siding on it, and made them stop work, and they had to reframe the entire back of the house.
Yes.
I think 3 feet in, which, it was cost, but it also really affected their design.
Yeah, most definitely.
I mean, the whole master suite was across the back of the back of the second floor, and all of a sudden it's 3 feet smaller.
Yeah, that's, to have to try to do something like that on the fly to keep things moving is not an ideal situation by any means for anyone.
Let's talk about some multi-purpose spaces as a way to kind of keep size under control. We talked a while ago about people wanting all these rooms in their house, but yet having a need to keep to a budget. So one of the things that we always talk about are creating some multi-purpose rooms, and saying, do you really need all the kids to have an ensuite bathroom, or can your 2 boys share a bathroom? Is it okay?
Exactly. That started being a hot button, probably almost 10 years ago now or so. It seems like in the higher end, 4,500, 5,000 square foot and up homes, the ensuites used to be quite common for several large scale homes we did. You might have one ensuite in addition to the primary, and then the others were Jack and Jill. And it hit a point where we had a client where we had to go back near River Oaks. It wasn't River Oaks proper, but it was near River Oaks. And we had to kind of do a redesign and remodel at the end, because the builder was just getting too much pushback on a Jack and Jill situation. And, what at that time was probably a $1.5, $1.6 million home. So, in that price range, we make every effort to do ensuite if the budget allows, but we certainly have those cases like you're saying. If you've got 2 boys and a girl, hey, give the girl the ensuite and make the boys share. It's not the end of the world. Flex spaces are great. Some people get too wrapped up in the idea of resale. One of the first questions we always ask a client, is this a 5-year home or is this a forever home, somewhere in between? And if it's the 15, 20 forever year home, we really stress, do what works for you. Don't overbuild because you've got a realtor friend that's telling you it has to be X amount of square footage and X amount of bedrooms and baths in this neighborhood. That's valuable information, but it doesn't necessarily pertain to you, because 20 years from now, those standards are going to have completely changed, and you can't predict and build for that properly now. We incorporate a lot of flex spaces where, like second floors in particular will have what equates to the size of a comfortable bedroom and possibly has just a small closet built into it, or like a wardrobe cabinet or something, versus a walk-in closet, but it does not have a bath attached. It'll have access to a hall bath that also maybe serves the game room on the same floor. And that becomes the perfect second home office, exercise room, occasional holiday guest bedroom, whatever you need. We do that a lot in our spec home plans actually too, because in spec home design, we're trying to cast a broad net. We're trying to appeal to as broad of an audience as we can. You don't quite know obviously what the ultimate buyer is going to want, so we try to give that flexibility in cost-effective ways. A 12 by 14 extra room, it's sheetrock and flooring. It's not additional plumbing fixtures. It's not additional appliances. It's relatively cost-efficient square footage.
Right. So. Back during when COVID hit, everyone started wanting like 2 studies,
yes.
and it's funny now that so many companies are back in the office and not at home. I wonder how many of the 2 study situations people are like, oh, why did I
do that? Yeah.
So I mean, I like the idea of trying to combine a study or a potential second study if you think you really need it with a guest suite.
Yes.
Maybe if you want to study on the first floor, maybe also consider making that a guest suite for older guests who don't have to hike up the stairs.
Exactly.
Right.
That's a very regular thing that we do and recommend to the client. Most of our clients tend to ask for that. They're already educated and think those things through. But if they have not potentially thought of it, it's something we always bring up to have, a full bath access, not directly connected to the study necessarily, but adjacent to and with a shower, so that it can serve as a sleeping area if need be.
And then for master suites, primary suites, I guess we're calling them now.
Flip-flop.
Primary, master, whatever. So I think everybody sees in the pictures the big fancy bathtubs, right, and the very elaborate shower combo tub enclosures, which look really cool.
Right.
It's funny how many remodel projects I've done where we go in and remove a bathtub.
Exactly.
People say, I never, we paid for this bathtub when we built the house.
Right.
We have never used this bathtub.
Yes.
It happens real often with jacuzzi tubs, with jetted tubs, right?
Definitely.
But even soaking tubs, I've had so many people say, you know what, we built this, we just never use it. Let's yank it and put something else there.
We get that question all the time in new construction design as well. Do I really have to do it? And it goes back to that. Is this a 5-year home or is this a 25-year home? And if it's a long-term home for them, we encourage them, if you're not going to use it, why are you spending the money on it?
Yeah.
Just either reduce square footage or have a larger shower, have a larger closet, whatever we can benefit from that space. But if you're not going to use it, it's silly, so.
Yeah, it's square footage that you're paying for. It's not just the air-conditioned square footage. It's the most expensive square footage that you can build. It's got an expensive tub and a faucet and tile and maybe a countertop ledge and
exactly
like all this stuff like crammed into a small area. So that area probably costs you $1,500 a square foot to build, not $300 a square foot to build.
Yeah, most definitely. That's very expensive. One of the kitchen and the bathroom obviously are the 2 most expensive parts of the home. So
yeah,
you can save in those areas. That's great.
People don't think as much about how the outdoor living spaces can really drive their costs too. Talk about expensive square footage, right? Like,
yes,
if you want to save money, like you could double the size of your game room or your bedroom and not spend that much money,
right?
But put that same square footage into an outdoor space where you're doing tile or some sort of decorative flooring, you're doing outdoor cabinets, countertops, grills, ceiling fans, wood ceilings, all that stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's not $300 square footage.
Exactly. It's still the same foundation cost. It's the same roofing cost. As you mentioned, the tongue and groove or a beadboard stained wood ceiling is very common. Depending on the columns used, et cetera, that can get elaborate and expensive if there's a lot of bracketing, steel columns, et cetera, depending on the style. So it's definitely not cheap square footage, and it's something that people don't factor in when they're thinking, okay, $300 a square foot, 5,000 square feet, 1.5 million. Well, not if you've got, 1,500 square feet of outdoor living space and 3-car garage, 4-car garage, et cetera. that all still costs something, even though it's not rolled into that discussion when we're talking about cost per square foot.
You throw a 30 by 15 porch on the back, and you throw a front porch on there, and that adds up to be some costly stuff. The nice thing about outdoor spaces is you can frame it, do a real basic finish on it, and then maybe 5 years later when you get a bonus or at work or something, you can
then you build your summer kitchen,
throw some money at it and build it outright.
Right. But, we typically spec a gas outlet and a hose bib, at what we assume is probably the best location for a summer kitchen to be built in at a future date if the client doesn't want it right now or possibly never. We have a few clients that are like, I'm never going to cook outside. Why would I do that? So, but we still kind of prep and prepare for it.
Is it, what's your opinion on framing out kind of future space inside the house? We've done some. I've seen a lot of people that say, I'll have this unfinished space in my attic that I'll convert later. Right. What's your thought on using that as a strategy?
It's good in certain scenarios. In the long run, that space is always going to cost you more, to do it later versus at the time of construction. But I think it can be a wise decision. We've actually got a project right now near Spring Branch where the street is oversized lots, large homes. Probably the average square footage of new construction on the street is in the 600 to 6,500 square foot range. But this client, they're just more practical. They know 4,500 square feet is what they want, what they need, what they'll use. But we are preparing about 1,000 to 1,500 square foot of bonus space off the second floor that can be finished out by them if they change their mind or their family grows at some point, or the ideal situation behind it is for that future owner that they don't want to deter a buyer 10 years from now by being 4,500 square feet instead of 6,000 square feet. So they're being proactive and thinking ahead and preparing for that. So it can be a good situation, especially for a young couple. Maybe you have one child now, but more in the future, et cetera, to get you in the neighborhood you want and the home you want now, and then finish out that space later as budget allows and the need arises.
Yeah, I mean, you might shave again. You're still spending the money on the structure. You still have the roof line to cover it. You're still probably running some electrical and plumbing to that area to be able to add it in the future. So you're still incurring some costs on it now, but maybe you're saving $15,000-$20,000 by not putting in the drywall and the paint and the trim and the flooring and all that stuff. So
and if you don't need the space now anyway, then that's kind of a good scenario. But it's not a magic bullet to save a ton of money necessarily. It is still costing you something, obviously.
Right. But as you mentioned a minute ago, if you already have, if you're planning it properly and like that future bedroom is going to be served by an existing bathroom or something like that, then that's a better scenario than running all the extra plumbing and electrical to add another future bathroom. So good design, good planning can save you some money when it comes time to do that.
Yes, certainly can.
Because again, finishing out a bedroom, not that expensive. Finishing out a bathroom, very expensive.
Yes, exactly. Especially if it's not pre-plumbed in the proper location and all of those things. So.
Yep. I know we said earlier, again, the kind of the big items are going to be where your real savings are, things like foundation, roof types, window types, even going from aluminum or a wood window to a vinyl is a big price swing, right? But you can realize some savings on your interior finishes as well. Although it's not the $50,000 chunks, it might be the $2,000 to $10,000 aggregate for those items, right? I think that some people get hung up on certain brands and certain types of finishes or something they have to have, because when you go to a showroom and you've got the base model sitting next to the tricked out model, you're always going to be drawn to the tricked out model, right? I try to counsel people that
Yeah.
If you only saw the base model sitting there, you'd probably think it's pretty nice.
Exactly.
It's like you're kind of disregarding it because you're looking at it in context with the very expensive one. So
that's a good way to put it. Yes.
So sometimes it's better not to even have those side by side. But on tile, you can spend $2 or $3 a square foot, or you can spend $20 a square foot or more.
Exactly.
On tile. And when you're talking about 4 bathrooms in a house plus your backsplash and patio, that delta of 2 to 20 can add up to a pretty good chunk of money.
It really can. I've noticed just in the last few years, you go to Floor and Decor and wander around a little bit. I mean, the variety at affordable prices is really pretty incredible. There seems to be a lot more affordable or semi-affordable choices these days than there was just 10 years ago. You can really get some great looking, very design-minded tiles and finishes for a reasonable amount.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, same thing with countertops, wood floors, all those things. Now, it's definitely important to point out that there is a difference in quality.
Sure.
Yes. The less expensive stuff is generally going to be made overseas, which a lot of it is anyway, but it has to do with the thickness of the material, the finish that's on it, the quality, just the quality that goes into it.
Sure.
Can make a difference. I mean, I've seen cheap tile crack and have issues. So, just know what you're buying, right?
True.
It's know that when you do go to the $2 or $3 square foot, it's not just the price.
Right.
There's some quality sacrifice as well. But again, not everybody needs to be driving an E-Series Mercedes.
Exactly.
Some people should probably be driving the Honda Accord.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. So
nothing wrong with that, right?
Exactly.
So to kind of wrap up our discussion, I think that back to one of our first points, I think the most important thing is to be honest with your team about your budget.
Definitely.
To be open, right?
And be open to the feedback that we're going to give you. If you come in with a 6,000 square foot wish list and say you want 4,500, put a little trust and confidence in us and realize that we've done this a few times and we know what we're talking about, and either be prepared to spend that extra money or have those hard conversations with your partner, your spouse, and say, what do we really need versus what do we want? Do we really want to do that 5th bedroom just in case we need it 2 times a year? You got to have a reality check sometimes and to try to dwindle that square footage number down.
Yep. So be honest, be realistic, listen to feedback, and again, involve the team early in the process. Again, if you can do it before you go out and buy the piece of property, we will love you for it.
Exactly. No, I'm glad you brought that up again. That is something we stress all the time. Please don't work with us all the way through design and then start going and interviewing builders. Now's the time to be doing it. And ideally we like people to select a builder, either pre-design or during design, not just be speaking with them and interviewing them, but actually make a selection so they can be there as part of the team and do some preliminary pricing rounds as the design progresses versus waiting until the end.
Yep.
So that's something I can't stress enough.
And then again, also, please listen to the feedback that we give you, and don't think that you can get something for nothing.
Exactly.
Don't think that you can hear from your design team, your builder, hey, this is $400 a foot, and then expect that you can actually go out and pull it off for $250 just because you want it for $250.
It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen well. It's not going to be a good end result if at all.
Yeah. So we all want to see successful projects. We want to see the stuff that we design get built. We want to see happy clients.
Happy homeowners, had referrals, Christmas cards coming the following year, all the things, we all want the same result. You just have to change expectations, be willing to adapt those expectations sometimes to get, where you need to be budget-wise.
Exactly. All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for today, David.
Okay.
I appreciate you coming in to join us.
I'm happy to do it. Thanks for having me.
Mention where where you can be found on the web and on the socials and all that stuff.
Right. Yeah. It's website is designdca.com. just the company name, and then same on Instagram, just Design DCA. And that's kind of our two prominent things. We're on YouTube as well, with some videos of projects either in the works or completed. It's something we're kind of trying to grow a little bit, but the primary sources are Instagram and our website.
Awesome. So, well, always great to see you, and
you as well.
All right, good luck, and thank you all for joining us on this most recent episode of the Your Project Shepherd podcast. We'll see you next time. Oh, you forgot to press record.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Don't even.
Just kidding. If you found us helpful and enjoyed listening, please support us by liking and subscribing here on your podcast platform, and also join us on our YouTube channel. We want to continue to bring you high-quality content and expert guests, and your support truly helps us to continue this journey. If you have any questions for me or my guests, or any feedback for us, you can email us at podcast@yourprojectshepherd.com. Thanks again.